My name is Erin Seeley. I use the pronouns she, her as hers, and I am so fortunate to be the CEO of YWCA Metro Vancouver. And I'm very pleased to welcome you here tonight to our second reimagining our cities event. Our first one was held in September 2022. Maybe I'll do an interactive quick show of hands. Who was at our September 2022 event? Nice, we've got some receipts. That's good. Staff don't count. And I want to acknowledge and take a moment to recognize that we are meeting tonight on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast English peoples, the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and express my gratitude to them for their stewardship of these lands. I'm very pleased that I get to welcome on stage Dennis Thomas Bona. Dennis is a member and elected councillor of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Yes. He's a member of the City of Vancouver's UNDRIP Task Force and a cultural liaison on the MST development of the Jericho lands. Very exciting. Talk about reimagining our city. He is also Executive Director of Indigenous Business Initiatives and Engagements with UBC Sauer School of Business. Over to you, Dennis. Welcome.
Haichka, Ichawao Masteo, Haitsapka Siam, Haitsapka, Abita, Kuquilam, Musquim, Iscomers, Isaleo Tama, Wanak Quanasqui, Talitsin at Slewata, Skohomish, Kokwakiwak, Hawaiian Steo, Ait Quanasqueloins, Quanzipa Stala. In translation, I said good day to you all, respected peoples, and welcome to the unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Wanak is my ancestral name, and I'm a member of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. But my bloodline, my kinship ties, and my familial ties connect me also to the Squamish, the Kwakwaka'wakw, and Hawaiian peoples as well, and also the Musqueam peoples. It gives me great honor to speak a little bit of the Hunk-Bamitam dialect that I know very little of, but I'm very honored always to sort of speak in that gesture and manner. I just really want to really thank the CWA for allowing me to be here today. I'd also like to thank the panelists for being the powerhouse that we are today, and really just want to ground this conversation in indigeneity. Some of the works that I've been able to participate on when it comes to a form of decolonization, a form of Indigenous touch points in society, specifically relating to even City Hall, with the work that I'm doing with the UNDRIP Task Force, or either within Sauer School of Business, or within all the different committees and boards I sit on. It's about grounding us in the right way when we think about Indigenous values systems, especially that have been bestowed to me through my predecessors and ancestors being stewards of these lands. And some of these words, that I'm doing within Sauder, in my own community, but also the city and different municipalities and corporate groups, is what does siamthit mean? To become rich in knowledge. What does not samat mean? To become one heart, one mind when we start thinking of how to have a panel discussion. What does it mean to have ahichoto is to be in unity, having as one. What does yuck with it mean? To untie. So sometimes I used to untie the harms that have been enforced on us. When we have this polarization topic, to untie things, to try to come back to the natural roots of being authentic to these lands and to the culture that really thrived the nation in this area. There's some of the unique things, and I just really wanted to sort of share a little bit about that culture, a little about those words, and as you have this fruitful and very open conversation, it's just to be mindful of those words, to be mindful of coming together, making sure that we're paddling together as a society to create a socially strong well-being in these places that we live, work, and play, and also learn.
So with that, I'm just going to create some good energy to pass my energy to you, to pass it to the panelists, and also to just ground us in the work that we do today and also moving forward into the future for a good time. But this is our nature song, and it's based off of the 4 elements of life, the wind, the land, the water, and the air, or the power of the sun, and the regenerative purposes that it has, but that connect us to all that we do. So this is our nature song. Osium. Heitzapka, Heichka. Thank you. I really, thank you very much. I really have the utmost respect for the panelists that are going to be here today, and the next person that I'm going to call about is Fiona Tan-Wai Pam Lam with Vancouver's Poet Laureate. So please welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for that very beautiful opening, Dennis. So, good evening, everybody. I'm so pleased and honored to be here today with an audience of open-hearted and open-minded people, both live and virtual. I've selected a poem by poet Joy Harjo, who is of the Muskogee Creek Nation and was the former 23rd Poet Laureate of the United States. And this poem celebrates our commonality, our common humanity, and I think you'll enjoy some of the metaphors in it. Perhaps the world ends here by Joy Harjo. The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of the earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens and dogs away from it. Our babies teethe at the corners. So their knees are also scraped underneath. It is here that children are given instructions on what it means to be human. We make people at it. At this table, we gossip, recall enemies, and the ghosts of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh with us at our poor, falling down selves and as we put ourselves back together once again at the table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. We have given birth on this table and prepared our parents for burial here. At this table, we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona, and thank you, Dennis, for starting us off in a good way. As I mentioned, Reimagining Our Cities, this is our second event as part of the City Shift project. When we began City Shift 3 years ago at YWCA, we started with a simple question: how do we create cities where everyone can thrive? Like everything in our complex world, the answer is not straightforward, nor is there a singular solution. Cities are dynamic ecosystems that take different forms and include webs of relationships and interactions. We know that to advance equity, we must be willing to do things differently. We must have the humility to try new approaches and tools, and the courage to shift how local government policy and planning decisions are made, which has been the focus of this project. We must be willing to listen and learn, and we must consider the vast range of experiences and viewpoints. I'm incredibly proud of the City Shift team and all our partners for being committed to this journey and this learning. Through City Shift, we have engaged in thoughtful conversations and built deeper relationships with cities across our region, exchanging resources, listening to each other's concerns and ideas. We've worked together in a spirit of making real progress toward equity and inclusion. Many people and groups have contributed to our collective success. Mayors, councilors, municipal staff, and collaborators have met with us throughout the course of this project, and I know we've got some of you here today in the audience. I want to acknowledge especially and appreciate the City of Burnaby for piloting the Gender-Based Analysis Plus Equity Framework in their upcoming community plans, and to New Westminster, the City of North Vancouver, and Port Moody for putting forward our Equitable Communities Resolution at the Union of BC Municipalities Convention last fall. We've also had the benefit of working with many smart, thoughtful advisory council members. Please stand or give a wave if you're here tonight. I want to first acknowledge our Community Advisory Council, Ida Mawanzia, Alice Leon, Kimberly Wong, Beatriz Salinas, Burku Unal, Joan Wandolu, Kaya Jacob, Myra Escobar, Prabha Khosla, Tessica Trong, Thivya Shanamugathan, and Sarah Sagi. And I also want to acknowledge our Strategic Advisory Council. Again, please give a wave if you're in the room, and I did see some of you. Alana Lawrence, Amina Yassin, Ash Peplow-Ball, Fancy Poitras, Katie Fitzmaurice, Mandy Buller, Miley Leong, Mira Orick, Rachel Siegel, who's also on our panel tonight, Rebecca Mahaffey, Renee de St. Croix, Dr. Saida Rasool, I don't know if I saw Saida, Sharon Singh, and Suzanne Skidmore. If you could join me in giving them a round of applause. We truly could not have done this project without them. We were also lucky to work with some amazing collaborators. A big thank you to everyone at SFU's Reach Cities project, Renovate the Public Hearing, Burnaby's Civic Innovation Lab, and the team at Women Transforming Cities. And so much gratitude to the experts who supported our research, outreach, and the creation of our Equity Kickstart Guide, which is also available in the tables outside. And finally, a big thank you to Women and Gender Equality Canada for funding this project and investing in equitable cities for all. At the heart of advancing equity is the need to exercise power differently and create more inclusive communities. Through initiatives like City Shift and with the guidance of our advisory council members, we've been able to engage directly with staff and elected representatives in local governments and encourage new ways of collective decision-making. It was these thoughtful conversations at a local level that prompted us to think more broadly about civic engagement, and we came to the theme for tonight's Reimagining Our Cities event, polarization. Here in Canada and around the world, we have certainly seen a rising trend towards ideological silos and public discourse that's heavily influenced by partisan animosity. While tools like the internet and social media can connect us, they do not leave space for a diversity of voices and opinions. So to dig deeper into this timely topic, we've got a lively evening ahead of us with an amazing panel of speakers. Our intention tonight is to explore how polarization is impacting our communities, rather than focus on specific issues. I also want to recognize the voices that are not here. As much as we endeavor to have diverse voices in these conversations, several important perspectives are missing from our panel this evening, including members of the Black, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse and differently abled communities. And now I'm very pleased to welcome Michelle Elliott, our MC and moderator this evening. Michelle is the host of CBC British Columbia's call-in show, BC Today, where she engages in conversation with listeners on the day's top stories and on issues important to British Columbians. Michelle, I am so excited to hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin and Fiona and Dennis, for the very warm welcome. I am delighted to be your MC and your moderator this evening. We have an incredible panel for you, including our esteemed keynote speaker as well, Shachi Kurl. As you may know, I host a phone-in show on CBC, and so when I heard that the topic was polarization, it sounded familiar. If you've heard my show, you may know we deal with that on almost a daily basis, right? There's hardly an issue these days that isn't imbued with some level of polarization. So my goal for this evening and generally on the show is to bring people to that kitchen table, right, Fiona? Bring people to the table, hear different perspectives, and hopefully come to a path where we can at least come to understand and appreciate other perspectives and points of view, and perhaps even come to some empathy. I keep my hopes high. And with that, I'd love to introduce to you our keynote speaker. Shachi Kurl is president of the Angus Reid Institute. Shachi works with public opinion data to further public knowledge and enhance the national understanding of issues that matter to Canada and the world. She's often found offering analysis on CBC's Power and Politics in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Globe and Mail, and on the editorial pages of the Ottawa Citizen, among many others. In October 2020, she moderated BC's only televised provincial election debate presented by the British Columbia Broadcast Consortium. Please welcome Shachi Kurl.
Thank you all so much. Ooh, those lights are bright, but I see you out there. Hi. And let me also take a moment to acknowledge actually our fantastic sign language interpreters who are working very hard getting their workout in. I'm very grateful to be here tonight and to be invited among such an august group. And Dennis, I just wanted to acknowledge and say that I loved the notion and the idea of untying. I often use the phrase unpacking, so we're going to be doing a little bit of unpacking tonight. Tonight's event, is entitled Shifting Cities, Reimagining Cities. Ultimately, if you ask me, cities are about people living together. But a big part of living together successfully consists of the ways that we communicate with each other well, or as it feels increasingly not so well. You don't need me up here at a lectern giving a keynote to know and understand and feel yourselves the extent to which it sometimes feels like our ability to communicate across divides is really coming apart at the seams. So let's try a quick experiment. Hands up, how many of you have had in the last little while, or call it the obligation or the opportunity to respond to someone or deal with someone in your work or school or in your daily lives who thought and had a belief and political belief system that was completely opposite to yours? Hands up. Okay, that's a lot of hands. Keep those, keep them up. Now, only keep your hand up if you have a colleague that you work closely with who fits that description, someone you have someone you have nothing in common with. Okay, I see a lot of hands just came down. Keep your hands up if you have a close friend, the kind of friend that you would invite to dinner, that you have nothing in common with. I see more hands coming down. And finally, okay, Angie, I see you. No, keep your hand up. Someone that you are dating, living with, or married to, that you have politically, small p politically, or in terms of your values system, very little in common with. Okay, there's like maybe a handful of you, hands down. Thank you for that. Our politics have become such a part of our identity. And when I talk about politics, I just don't mean party politics and affiliations, but really our belief sets, our value systems. They have become such a part of our identity that south of the border, the Pew Research Foundation recently found that in the United States, more people are entering into interracial marriages, interreligious partnerships and marriages, common laws, etc. All kinds of ways that people from different backgrounds are coming together, but not interpolitical. I don't know if you've seen the apps that are now available for GOP people in the States to hook up with GOP people and for Democrats to just hook up with Democrats. What's happening? What is this leading to? Well, I can tell you that it is leading to a profound decline in trust in the institutions that we used to hold sacrosanct. In British Columbia, 48% now believe that the news stories that you see from major legacy traditional organizations cannot be trusted. 84% of Canadians tell us through the work of the Angus Reid Institute that news reporting should reflect a range of different views. 84%, that's a near unanimous number. However, only 28% say in turn that they see their views reflected in what they're consuming in news. In journalism narratives, and I spent the first part of my career as a journalist, we often talk about what's known as the Overton window. It's also known as the window of discourse, and it was introduced into political and sociological discussions by a guy named James Overton. He got the window named after him. And his concept is that the political acceptability or viability of an issue has a lot to do with the extent to which it fits into a window that is predicated kind of by public opinion, by what people deem to be okay and acceptable. And you can have a right point of view and a left point of view, but it's within confines or it's within strictures. What I can tell you it feels like today is that there is no Overton window. The window got smashed, and everybody's in the house looking at their own windows and seeing their own view of the world through social media, through TikTok, through the kinds of splintered and dispersed news that we're consuming, or in many cases not consuming. So we wanted to try to unpack the extent to which Canadians really think and feel about a lot of things that do feel so divisive and so polarized these days. We undertook a significant research project, and we asked about a whole package, if you will, of social values issues, issues around climate change, around reconciliation, around gender, around immigration, around race, all the stuff. Put it all into the blender, asked Canadians what they thought. And what we found is that people in this country actually fall into one of 5 categories. And you heard Aaron talk about the fact that, in fact, when we consume news today and it's about an issue, it's often only 2 perspectives that we're hearing from. I see some nodding heads, so I know that that feels true. But in fact, we're sort of broadly in 5 categories. On one end of the spectrum, at one extreme end, we've got the folks that we refer to as the zealous activists. And who are they? At heart, they are activists. They want to change. They are seeking to drive, other people call them progressives, and I don't like the whole progressive-regressive dichotomy myself. So zealous activists tend to sit towards the left of that spectrum. They tend to be younger, university-educated, urban, women. And what they have in common with the folks at the far end, that far right end of the political spectrum, is their absolutism, the belief that they have. And in some ways it's admirable and breathtaking, but in other ways it's like, whoa, the absolute belief that they have that what they believe in, what they espouse, what they strive for is the only way possible. And you're either on the boat or you need to get out of the boat. There's no room for anything else. And we see that as well on the other end of the spectrum with the defiant objectors. These folks tend to be on the right-hand side of that spectrum. They tend to be older, they tend to be men, they may be urban, but they're also more likely to be ex-urban or rural. And whatever the zealous activists want, the defiant objectors do not want, and vice versa. But here's the thing. That only accounts for about 37% of our population. About 17% are in that activist group, about 20% are in that hell no objector group, and there's 63% of us in the middle, that silenced majority. And I say silenced as opposed to silent. You've got the quiet accommodators at about 26%, the conflicted middle, who are literally conflicted and in the middle about everything, at about 18%, and the frustrated skeptics at about 20% as well. But I want to focus on that group in the middle, those quiet accommodators, that conflicted middle, and those frustrated skeptics. These are folks who are increasingly consuming information in a polarized, black, white, up, down, yes, no world, and they're feeling a bit verklempt. They're afraid to open their mouths about things. In part because our political actors, our leaders, have figured out how to exploit and drill down and create more fire by heading up those 2 groups on either end. Ain't no satisfaction for them in the middle. So we now live in a place where both sidesism really is, here's one really loud absolutist point of view, and here's another really loud absolutist point of view. What about the rest of us? The truth is, and the fact is, and we know this from the data, Canadians are pretty sophisticated people. They are capable of holding 2 views that may be in conflict in their heads at the same time, and their brains do not break. They do not explode. But you wouldn't know that at the height of the convoy protests. You wouldn't know that to hear from our prime minister at the time, who dismissed the supporters of the convoy as a fringe minority at a time when actually 45% of Canadians said, look, we don't really agree with what they're doing, but we understand the frustration. And on the other side, you had almost at that time, the putative opposition leader calling those folks heroes, wherein actually a good chunk of that 63% in the middle saw more than that. They saw people who were frustrated. They also saw a lot of yahoos who took things way too far, created a lot of destruction, a lot of vandalism, a lot of problems. Dramatic pause. Canadians can believe in climate change, that it exists, that is human-caused. They can believe and get behind an attempt to fight against it. But many also at the same time question whether taxation or carbon pricing is the right way to fight against it. But these, again, are not necessarily views that you will hear because people are afraid of being labeled or targeted as, well, you're anti-climate change. Well, no, maybe I just think that there's another way. Maybe it's industry that's going to do it. Maybe it's innovation. Maybe there's another way to bring it forward. So that's just a couple of examples. Ultimately, what we found is that Canadians are telling us that they are exhausted by the culture wars. They are exhausted by the polarization and the polarity. The two most common words that they associate with the culture wars are exhaustion and division. But that fatigue is coming at a time where, again, our leaders are increasingly scorched earth in election after election after election. You do not hear, hey, most British Columbians actually agree on most stuff, and maybe we all just need to take the temperature down a bit and look for the ways where we can come together and find commonality. It is, if you believe this, you are virtuous. If you believe that, you are a boob. And it's happening on all sides of the political spectrum. Our aim in doing this work was not only to measure the size and the scope of where Canadians sit along that political spectrum. And by the way, I'm giving you, within the agreed time of this tonight's event, the 15-minute version of this talk. There is a 1-hour version. I won't give you the 1-hour version because people will cry in the front, the hardworking organizers. But what I will say is if you want more, I invite you to go to angusreid.org and like it's a 5-part series, so there's a lot more to get into. But let me just say this. Our aim wasn't just to try and measure and delineate and better understand who folks are and what they believe and how they feel about all of these things. But it was also to attempt to try to create some space, some language, a template for all of us to be able to have conversations that are not once again dragged into the polarity of the two sides and the absolutism that defines so many of the hard conversations that we're having to have today. I hoped, and I think by being here tonight, I would like to flatter myself to say, yes, maybe it's working, that we are creating some space and some language. It gives all of you in your conversations with family, with friends, with colleagues, with others, with neighbors, an opportunity to say, hey, this person might be sitting in the middle of something, or they might be sitting on the far end of something, but at least I know where I'm situated, I know where they're situated, and I know how to start that conversation around our differences. I know how to start the fact that this is where they might be coming from and be able to listen without judgment and be able to express myself with passion, yes, but without anger and without judgment. So tonight's event is hopefully, and in our panel conversation we'll get into it a bit, and a step, a second step, a third step, another step on the way to maybe trying to take some of the weight out of those two ends of the spectrum and more evenly distribute it into what we're dealing with as we have these really tough convos. But I also want to say to you, there is a way, if you care about this and if it's something that you would like to see change, there are things you can do. You all are smart people. I can see it on your faces. Demand better from your politicians. Demand better from your leaders. Check them, call them. If you see stuff on Facebook or on X or in other social media spaces where you see conversations getting boiled down to the lowest common denominator, call it out. You have that in you. We are the 63%. We can do this. So I'll wrap it up there. I know we're going to talk a little bit more. But hopefully this sets the table and lays out some of the tools that we're going to need to have some of these conversations in a healthier way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shachi. I have always marvel at how Shachi is able to distill all the data and all the responses that Angus Reid gets from Canadians across the country and is able to tell us our story somehow. I did feel like there was a mirror being put up to us throughout that speech. 15 minutes, as it were, but I'm sure the one hour, when you said that the 1 hour would make us cry, I didn't think it was logistics. I just thought the details would make us cry. Sometimes I want to cry. No, I'm kidding. Thank you very much. I'm excited now to introduce our panel members to the stage. First, we have Aftab Irfan, the Executive Director of the Morris J. Wosk Center for Dialogue at SFU. And Aftab teaches in the school's Masters of Public Policy program. She's a scholar practitioner with a PhD in urban planning and a keen interest in convening conversations that matter at this moment in time in human history. A first-generation settler, originally from Iran, Aftab left her mark on the city of Vancouver when she served as the city's inaugural Chief Equity Officer from 2020 to 2023. Andrea Reimer is a former 3-term Vancouver City Councillor, spearheading Vancouver's framework for reconciliation and leading efforts to become the world's greenest city. After leaving municipal politics, Andrea was awarded a Loeb Fellowship at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, where she studied and taught about urban policy and strengthening democracy. She now teaches about power in practice and works with local governments, First Nations, nonprofits, and businesses to support bolder action on climate and social policy. Ginger Gosnell-Myers is a fellow at SFU Morris J. Wosk Center for Dialogue, where she focuses on decolonization and urban indigenous planning. Ginger is a member of the Nisga'a and Kwakwaka'wakw Nations and served as the City of Vancouver's first Indigenous Relations Manager. Ginger was central to advancing Vancouver as the world's first city of reconciliation and created its reconciliation framework to ensure Indigenous identities and worldviews were included in city plans. And Rachel Siegel is a political strategist and founder of Beyond a Ballot. She is on a mission to make politics and government more accessible to women in Canada. And with her background as a lawyer, university lecturer, and seasoned political strategist, she's uniquely equipped to educate and empower Canadian women in political engagement. I'd like to welcome our esteemed panel to the stage. This is a real treat to have women of this level and accomplishment on stage to have this conversation. Yes. I have so many questions, but let me start with, we had a real sense of the polarization that really has seeped into all aspects of our lives from Shachi earlier in her presentation. But let's talk about polarization from our other panelists now. And starting with Aftab, from your unique vantage point, how do you see polarization where you work and in your community?
Great. Let's see, does this work? Yes. I think the most obvious example was already mentioned, which is social media. I see lots of polarization on social media, and I've given up on trying to do anything there. It doesn't seem like anything good can happen in that space. I also actually experience a lot of internal polarization, and maybe it is the kind of holding two things in my mind, but there's tension within that. I would say within my realm of work, one of the interesting spaces that I'm working in, and actually the Center for Dialogue is convening 3 different residence assemblies for local governments. And the idea of a residence assembly is that you bring in a mathematically representative sample of the population. There's like some kind of draw, and you have this room as like a subset of your community. And so there's people who are 14 and people who are in their 80s, and of all genders and all races and across the political spectrum. And so to hold that space, it's kind of interesting when I first started to facilitate these spaces, I was like, it's a cool experiment. Like, let's all get on the same page. I forgot that we were polarized as a society, and so that's in the room. And the way that it shows up is somebody will say something like, we should abolish the police, or, I get afraid when there's trans people or homeless people, and there's somebody in the room who's a trans person or a homeless person who's a member of the police or is married to somebody, so it is a kind of, the ecosystem is in the room. And I think we are so used to speaking within our own circles, talking to other people who think like us, using language that's insider language, that this kind of speaking across the divide, like, it just, people are triggered almost from the moment that they're in the room. So I do feel like this kind of, how do we build back that skill of speaking across the divide? And the Resistance Assembly is actually a really interesting place to experiment with that.
I wonder, how do you get past, because, we hear about ad hominem attacks on social media, right? And so much of the discussion gets right to people's identities and how you identify. And so if you're talking about police, there's a police officer in the crowd, in the room. If you're talking about trans rights, there's a trans person in the room. And so it gets to people's identities, and I wonder how that hits and how that contributes to that polarized conversation. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as well. And Ginger, to you, that same question. From your point of view, how do you see polarization in your work and in your community?
I'll talk about it in reference to the Indigenous community that I belong to. Polarization, for us is likely different than the rest of society because we have been othered for so long. And so, we have always been on the opposite end of whatever spectrum is out there. Our perspectives are often not well understood, and we're often up against the status quo regardless. And so I feel like our community is used to what we're now talking about as polarization because of our experiences in having to manage that. However, we're not immune to, I think, a lot of the, false information that is circulating around social media. I think the pandemic really surfaced a lot of misinformation in our community. It made a lot of vulnerable people more vulnerable. And it isolated folks who probably shouldn't be isolated and really, deserve to have a sense of community. But one of the things that I have noticed is that we're not isolating folks who feel like they're more drawn towards, fake information and misinformation. They're not on the outside. And I think part of that is our community is so small, right? And we're used to the harmful impacts of residential schools and colonization. We're used to lateral violence. We're used to, having to, fight and then make up because, we are such a small community. We are all we have, right? And we're used to this cycle, and maybe it's not necessarily always seen as healthy, but it is giving us a sense of resilience in the face of the polarization that I think is impacting others probably more than us because we're so used to this.
And there's a way back, a way to reach out, past that polarization. I hope we can perhaps try and learn from that model throughout this evening. And Rachel, to you, the same question. From your vantage point, how do you see polarization in your work as well as in your community?
When do I not see polarization in my work? My work is based on the fact that we have had such polarization in politics for so long, and I just got tired of it. I wanted to change the conversation, and so Beyond a Ballot was born, an organization that tries to change the way we communicate and we talk about politics, and we say, we don't care what your position is, just that you have one. And our government was set up to be militant. We have an official opposition. When you go into Ottawa, anyone been to the House of Commons in Ottawa? Yes, it's beautiful, right? Luckily, got to work there for a long time and loved every minute of it. But does anyone know how far apart the opposition and the government sit? Call it out. 2 sword lengths apart. And then we sit here and we try and figure out why we have so much division in politics, because that's historically where it comes from. And so as somebody who has spent now almost 2 decades working in politics, federally, provincially, municipally, across Canada, the thing that concerned me the most in my work was the division having an impact on women's participation. Because women make up 51% of the electorate in this country. Think about that, 51%. And we love numbers, right? But yet, in the last federal election, only 28% of women felt that they were educated on at least one issue. Every political party that I've ever worked for, the minute I get there, they say, can you help us engage women? Why? Because women hold this power. We are such a powerful group, regardless of political affiliation in this country. And my message and the work that Beyond a Ballot is doing is trying to raise that narrative and change the conversation and say, yeah, politics is divisive and there's division at its core, but it doesn't have to be. And we can use education and community building as a way to try and combat some of the alienation associated with that division.
It must be really interesting work as well, because the women who join are from different points in the political spectrum, and so here they are working together with one goal, essentially. Andrea, to you now, from your vantage point as a former politician and now having announced that you're seeking the NDP nomination in Vancouver Little Mountain, so politics is around you. Some supporters there. How do you see polarization in your work, in your community?
I was wondering how long it was going to take for that to come up. When I agreed to do this talk, I had not yet made that decision. So here I am. The other challenge of going last on such an amazing panel is there's so many threads I want to pick up on, but I will answer the question. My work has always been my community. Like, it's never been separate. I've been really fortunate often to get paid for that, in addition to putting in a lot of volunteer time on it. And like Rachel, a lot of my the way that I've tried to move that forward is through electoral politics and government, like actually making policy. Polarization has been around for a while. I guess, like, at the risk of already responding to something, but I was struck, Rachel, when you were talking, like, the sword length thing, it is a feature of politics, but of Western European politics, right? Not all politics. And so I think there's also that alienation and that opportunity. When you meet with people at the community level, they just want to be heard. And the piece that you can create for them is the space to be heard, but I think critically the space to listen. So this issue of polarization and how it shows up, little known fact, one of the reasons I left City Council, decided not to run for a 4th term, was the election of Trump, which seems weird, right? That a city councilor in Vancouver would be like, oh my God, Trump got elected, so I have to leave government. But what I'd seen this, I was elected about 2 weeks after Obama was elected, and sort of saw what was energetic political, ideological rhetoric start to twist a lot, like the anti-Black racism and the tone of that, and you were starting to see it wash up on the shores of public hearings in Vancouver, and this lack of, like, this kind of discourse. And when Trump got elected, I thought, I put my entire life into this institution of democracy, believing, coming from the streets and, a world that doesn't really believe a lot that change is possible on your behalf, but really investing in it. And then it elects Trump, and I'm like, this doesn't work. Like, if it can produce that outcome, then it's not going to produce the outcomes that we need for us to make change happen. And so I was fortunate to get this fellowship at Harvard. I learned a lot. I'd never been to university at all, so to jump in at Harvard was an amazing opportunity, but quite a time for them talking about democracy. So I had this chance to learn a lot about a sort of academic perspective on polarization along with my lived experience of it, and it's really informed all of the work that I've been doing over the last 5 years, and particularly this concept of power literacy, that Trump may be bad at, and Trump is a surrogate sort of for a column of activity that sort of seems geared towards destroying civil discourse and therefore the functioning of democracy, which depends on civil discourse. Really understanding, he might be bad at 100 million things, but what he's very good at is power, and he understands power. And if we choose to not be good at that, or in fact ignore it altogether, we're going to lose. And so how can we learn about power and interact with it in a positive way and use it as a transformative vehicle for change? That's really been my interest. And the biggest power of all is to be able to walk into a room and not give away your power to someone else because you think they won't agree with you, right? And that's the space that we have to create.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andrea. And you're absolutely right. So many threads to pull on, right? The impact of colonization, the role of misinformation, and political rhetoric. Aftab, I'd like to ask you about that. We can start kind of digging into the political rhetoric part of it. When we talk about social and human rights issues, there's a lot of politicization. And we hear people throwing around those terms, the rhetoric like, identity politics or cancel culture. And it seems to be, again, a proxy for a whole bunch of different ideas. So what do they actually mean, these terms, and how do we move forward with these social discussions, even as those terms, keep interfering?
This is a super juicy question, and I probably will pick up on just a little bit of it. I want to talk about cancel culture. I agree with the framing of the question, which is that identity is being politicized quite a bit. And I think essentially what is happening is that some of the groups who in the past few hundred years have not had a lot of power, have been oppressed, I'm talking about Indigenous people, Black folks, queer, trans folks, folks with disabilities, now have like a little tiny bit of power, and in some cases a lot of power, and there's a reaction to that. And so I think, and this is not new, I mean, it's like when women got the vote or started entering the workplace, there was a lot of opposition to that like identity was politicized in a similar kind of way. So I think we are not really looking at a new phenomenon. So when there's the kind of complaint about cancel culture, I think it's important to remember, it's kind of like what we are talking about is people not being able to be cruel or not being able to break human rights. Like that's what we are actually talking about. And I think when we think of who is actually getting canceled, like who doesn't get to participate in social life, in political life, in economic life, that is the folks who are getting put into jail for petty crimes, and which is disproportionately racialized folks. That's actually who is getting canceled. And so it's kind of, it's very twisted to me that we worry about Kanye West getting canceled or something, and in actual fact, he's making more money because he got canceled. So it's I think we just need to not fall for that. And I think in some ways we need to keep our eye on the bigger trends of what is happening and what the historic and what the context is. I think there's just like a secondary answer to this, which I think is important too, which is there's some truth to the accusations of cancel culture. And I think that there is a conversation within social justice movements about this. There's a book I love by Adrienne Maree Brown, who's a Black queer facilitator and organizer. It's called We Will Not Cancel Us. And it's like a recognition of, yes, like if we get into the habit of cutting everybody out who we don't like or blocking them on social media, we will actually lose our ability to be within community and work with people that we actually mostly agree with. Like, that is a trap that we could fall into, and how do we walk back from that? So I think, when there's kind of accusations like that, even when it's like, I can see that it is not true, I ask myself, like, what is the little bit of it that is true? What's the grain of truth in it? And I feel like that is a key to how do we work differently with the dynamics of it.
That is so interesting, and I think I know I'm supposed to go down the line here with questions, but I feel like people want to jump in on that because, Shashi, I mean, that's what you talked about, right? The 63% are afraid to speak, and possibly because of that cancel culture. You know, they're afraid to not be aligned with the polarized sides in any debate.
It's less about the cancellation of heinous people saying and doing heinous, unacceptable, bad, wrong things. It's more about those who might have, to your point, that kernel of agreement or a kernel of understanding for where some of, and this is less about actions. I'm not talking about the Harvey Weinsteins, but I'm talking about, you know, those who have been, you know, others who have said inconvenient or terrible things. You know, there are a lot of people. We deal a lot with what should be as opposed to what is. And that is challenging, because what it means is that we want to, again, cancel, cut out, put away those who very publicly have the power and the platform to say things, saying sometimes what I call the quiet part out loud in terms of reflecting a point of view that exists. It may be ugly, it may be wrong, it often is ugly and wrong, but what is also true in that moment is a significant segment of a population may also feel that way. And so in cancellation, what happens is you lose part of the room. Rather than having a fair conversation or even a fair fight on the substance of issues, it's you're canceled. The people who follow you now feel canceled or disengaged, and then that's it. And that opportunity for dialogue and that opportunity for understanding is gone. We are 8 years removed. I can't believe it's almost been a decade since the moment of the basket of deplorables, which turned that 2016 election in a big way. You know, the outreach around that could have gone very differently. And I wonder, you talk, Andrea, about the trauma of that 2016 election outcome and everything that's come with it and everything that feels like it's coming again full circle. I just wonder what would have happened. And people are so annoyed with Joe Biden these days, and fine. Be annoyed with him for substantive reasons, but not because he's an old white man who embodies perhaps space to listen to views that make people uncomfortable.
I'm definitely not mad at him for that. I'm mad at him for other things.
I just want to also remind the audience that you will have a chance to ask your questions as well via Slido. And so you can use Slido to input your questions, and raise your hand if you do need help in getting your questions asked as well if you aren't able to access Slido this evening. We do have YWCA team members in the aisles who can input those questions on your behalf. So we'll get to your questions in under half an hour from now. And so that I learned a lot from that response. Thank you very much. And it goes to, you know, how polarization is impeding progress on these issues. And so, Ginger, how does polarization impact, you know, the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the reconciliation work, and steps to decolonization? How does it get in the way?
Well, I mean, we're used to it, right? Like, I think having Indigenous voices at the table is very rare, and most of my work is trying to cut through red tape and kick through doors that have typically been closed to people like myself. And so, you know, when I look at the issue of polarization, I always feel like I'm on the other side regardless. A lot of the work that I do is about creating space for Indigenous knowledge to be reflected in cities. And the only way that can happen is for things that people hold dear, like a lot of the long-standing policies and processes, to actually crumble and get out of the way so that new systems and processes can be created. And that is often met with a significant amount of resistance. And you often don't hear about that resistance in the public. These are backroom conversations that, you know, decision makers hold amongst themselves, but it happens on a regular basis as we are working towards understanding truth and reconciliation. And I'll bring up the role of decolonization in what we see happening here. There's a couple of concepts that I hear when talking about polarization. One is that the oppressed, when given the opportunity, will oppress others. And so we have a system where a lot of people feel absolutely voiceless. And we have tools through social media where people can finally start to express themselves and be engaged and find communities and networks across fields where they normally felt alone and isolated. And so, if they aren't given opportunities to really be engaged in healthy ways, then we're going to see the negative opposite of, that happen. And we see that, surfacing with the polarization debates and divides that we see. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I think about is decolonization is really messy, right? I think we risk romanticizing the role of decolonization. And a lot of my colleagues and friends, when we're, sitting around the kitchen table talking about what is the role of decolonization and what's happening in the world, a lot of my friends really feel like decolonization can only happen through means of violence, because it is about dismantling the systems that we have in place today, systems that are responsible for causing a lot of isolation and harms to people. They're holding us back. And those systems are built so strongly that they are not just going to nicely move aside in a very Canadian way. They have to be ripped apart. And that in itself is a violent act. I'm of the other view. I think that, we are really rational people here. I think the experience that we have here in Canada, for Indigenous peoples has been extremely violent and extremely oppressive. But we are very patient and thoughtful negotiators. And we know what it takes to reach across the table and, show all of our cards and come to an agreement as to, we're going to dismantle this, and then what? And I feel like more people need to be empowered with that sense of self-determination so that we can see a future where we can break the things that are holding us back and create something new. And I don't see us talking about creating new things. I see us going back to the old debates of, are we going to support big oil? What's the role of abortion? And all of these things that people have been talking about for so long, can we just go on to the things that we need to be talking about? That's the polarization that I feel right now is that.
The rigidness of the system within which we're working. And so when you talk about the violence needed to dismantle that, what does that look like?
Well, I think we see efforts for decolonization happening around the world right now, right? I think we've been experiencing this for a long time. Here in Canada, we still have the Indian Act. It's been a tool of Indigenous oppression since the 1800s. It still exists today, right? What is it going to take to repeal the damn Indian Act? And I hope it's not violence, because usually the violence experienced is our violence. We're on the other end of that.
Did anyone want to respond, Andrea? A lot of thoughts there, yeah.
Yeah, so many thoughts about everything that Ginger said. Well, I'm going to pick up just a brief thread from Shachi and Aftab earlier. And I was like, I'm going to say something, and even just polarization is going to create challenges here. There's an article, I've been really, a couple of articles I want to mention. One is from a conservative, David Brooks, so that's can you find good things in an article from a conservative? He refers to himself as having gone through the process of becoming human over the last 20 years when he talks about this article, so it's an interesting frame. But the article is called How America Got Mean. It's a very long article, I think it's about 20,000 words. And the basic premise of it is that we lack a common purpose that for humans to have a moral code, they need a common purpose. If you lack a common purpose, there's no point in having a moral code on how to get there. And that the common purpose of America has become making money. He's American, so this is why he's writing about America. And that in the absence of a moral code, all of these things happen, right? Like if it's about being validated in your identity, but there's no moral code for that to sit in, you just keep looking for more and more validation until you get to the top of the hill and get canceled, essentially, is what he says. And so he, unlike many of these articles, actually prescribes some solutions in it, and one of the things I found great. The other one I wanted to point to was by Maurice Mitchell, who wrote a very seminal article back in November called Building Resilient Organizations, that from the left, a black man on the progressive side of the spectrum, the self-described progressive, kind of taking the piss out of progressives for some of their behaviors and also prescribing or creating some frameworks that might be better and more healthy ones. On this issue, though, Ginger, you brought up a lot of stuff. It inspired in me a couple memories that have been triggered very recently. So when I do interviews, when Jody Wilson-Raybould stepped down, they pull me in to interview me, and they're like, well, Jody was very independent and you were really independent. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure you mean independent. I think you mean something else, right? But they won't say it. And then when Melanie Mark left, they're like, so you and Jody and Melanie were all very independent. And I'm like, I think you might mean Indigenous. Like, it's a little, it's different, right? But
I'll bring that note back.
Yeah. But realizing that the experience of Indigenous women, and Melanie and Jody both, Jody grew up in her community, Melanie was fostered out, but has reconnected with her community ways back, and I'm in the process of reconnecting with mine. So we have three very different experiences, but we bring a set of very uncommon, as Ginger said, experiences into government, and frankly, they don't really know what to do with it, right? And yet, our democracies were developed with a fundamental belief that it's about representation, and so we must be at that table. So how does the table create space for us, and how do we create the structures that give us the strength we need to be independent? We'll try to make policy, recognizing it's not about, like, it can't be about us and them, because if it is, it will be a burn it down framework. And that, it was funny when you were saying decolonization could be violent. In my head, I'm thinking, yes, colonization has been violent, right? And so what is the third space we create where it is nonviolent and we're able to find the space to move forward, honestly though, right? Like without backing away from the truth, without using words like independent when we mean something totally different. Yeah.
Can I say something very briefly to this?
Sure, go ahead.
When you were describing the window of discourse named after what I assume was a white man, but there's a kind of, I feel like...
Kind of sounded that way.
Kind of sounded that way. I feel like, especially the voices for decolonization that I'm hearing often are outside of the window of discourse. Like, they're not just talking about let's make a little change here and there. It's like, yeah, let's fundamentally change everything that this is, because it has been violent. And I feel like, in a way, I feel like instead of enlarging the window of discourse to include that and know what to do with that, and we just kind of brush it off. And maybe to your point, we almost like rather destroy the window of discourse than bring in some of these truths that are like deeply uncomfortable for settler society. So so often I kind of feel like the Indigenous person at the table is speaking in a way that like the rest of the group will either totally ignore or even like fall apart. But that stance doesn't really find a place. So I do feel like there's something, at least here in this context, I experience about the decolonization conversation that has the possibility of doing something different with that window of discourse, but I don't see it happening very often.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Ginger, thank you. I learned a lot from your response about the structure and system that exists and the changes that are needed. And to that point, Rachel, you launched this multi-partisan initiative working within these existing structures. How do you use that space to open things up and open dialogue and learning across political views?
So that's our goal. It doesn't always happen. This past few days have actually been quite difficult for me. Some of you might have heard a headline in the last couple of days that Kim Campbell had called Pierre Poilievre a liar and a fearmonger. Did you hear that? That was my podcast that happened on. And that was on a podcast which was launched in order to open dialogue and to have people come together. It's hosted by myself and my co-host, who are from completely different political backgrounds. And our goal with that episode was to give a 90-minute platform, normally we're at 40-ish, to the first ever and only woman to hold the office of Prime Minister in this country in commemoration of International Women's Day. What transpired? Well, someone listened for an hour and a half to a woman who has sat on all levels of government. She was part of the Vancouver School Board, Vancouver City Hall, the legislature, and almost several ministries in Ottawa. And then finally, for a very brief moment in time, she was Prime Minister. But the point that I'm getting to when you talk about how we're using Beyond a Ballot is that the sad part that came out of all the media attention that we received the last few days is that instead of the 89.5 minutes of a brilliant woman who had held an office that no one, regardless of her electoral history, nobody in this country who is female or identifies as female has ever held, and that was the headline. And so for me, for the last few days, I've been thinking a lot about this. How do we have open conversations about politics without polarizing them? And so all I can say is that we have to keep going. We're going to continue to provide a platform for these conversations, a platform for education. We're hoping, Melanie Mark has promised me at some point she will come on our podcast, as well as Jody, who I agreed a couple weeks ago. So stay tuned. And hopefully you'll come on, right? Okay? Come on. Great. You heard it. But I think my belief is that part of it is rooted in this component of educational resources. And so maybe, I got a ton of messages from women who said, wow, I learned a lot about Kim Campbell. And that's really what we have to hold on to, is that through all the noise and the social media and the 6-second media clips that they're playing on my podcast all over last night's evening talk shows, it's about the woman who doesn't have access to those resources finally having a touch point. And every day in my work, that's what I try and do, is take people that have never had touch points with political education and provide them resources that can play into their everyday lives. And if we don't do it, because I waited for a long time for someone else to do it, let me tell you. I have 2 kids under 3, so this wasn't high on my agenda. But I waited years, I really did. And so we have to just keep going and working towards that mission of education and trying to drown out the division that's created around that.
I feel like I need to ask you, because media plays a role, right? So obviously in those headlines. So what to you should have been the headline?
I should be able to write something fabulous.
But how should media be covering these so that we get to the depths of that conversation?
There was so many interesting points, and I'm not going to do a plug here, but I am. Go home, download.
You already have been.
Go download the episode. No, but just really listen to it, because what an amazing voice in this country, regardless of your political leanings, or to have somebody that's done something that so few have, and to have her, she so graciously gave us so much of her time. We actually she's a little bit older now, and she was having issues with technology. We taped it twice. So she gave us about 4 hours of her time in Italy, late at night, to come on and to try and educate Canadian women about politics. And so how could the media have reframed that? I mean, it could have reframed it as, here's a lesson from Canada's only prime minister. Here's what you can do, you young woman, to become Canada's next female prime minister. And let's start spinning things like that instead of the divisiveness of the 0.08 second comment that she made an hour into the show.
Appreciate that, Rachel. Thank you very much. Andrea, to you, how can local communities, you've worked obviously at the city council level, how can local communities play a proactive role? What can local communities do to mitigate that polarization? And if you have any examples that you'd like to share in terms of fostering collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can we get that mic?
Technology fail here, sorry.
See? Anyone can have trouble with technology.
Yeah, there we go. It was perfectly timed. I did maybe just a brief follow-up on Rachel, and then I'll go into that.
Absolutely.
One of the other, so the power literacy that I mentioned was one of the key things I learned in my time at Harvard. The other one, which kind of blew me away, so when you think about it, it makes sense. You cannot control a divisive, somebody profiting off of division. You can't control their behavior. There's nothing you can do about it. It's very frustrating, but there is literally nothing you personally can do about that. You do have a lot of control over your own behavior. And all of the research shows that in democracies where, I'm going to say an authoritarian leaning is the language you would use in academia, starts rising. So someone using division to kind of sort of tilt the balance of democracy away from democratic institutions. When they start rising, it's the opposition's response to them that determines how much power they're given by the general public, the 63%, right? And so the use of language like that justifies their behavior. And so the opposition, you have to be so in control. And so that sucks, right? Because you're listening to this person be awful, and you have to be in control. And where I think having these spaces, like the one that Rachel's creating, to be supportive so that we can be more in control becomes very important. And it segues into local government and where local communities can do that. So when I was on city council, I served with Mayor Gregor Robertson. Some of you from Vancouver, if you're from Vancouver for a while, you may remember him. If you're new, you may not. And he was asked one time on a panel what my superpower was, which was super embarrassing. And he said, he's like, well, Andrea's superpower is creating working groups and advisory committees. Where I'm like, oh my God, dude. Anyway, it turns out it actually is a kind of superpower. Because the thing about it is government, imagine a bike wheel, right? So you have the spoke in the middle. I love that I got Gregor and bike in the same little thing. So you got a spoke or a hub in the middle and all these spokes. And so people spend all the time coming to government on the spokes, right? And you're the hub in the middle and you hear all their problems, all their needs, all their wants, all their concerns. They don't have to listen to each other in that model. And that doesn't work well for community. So if you can take yourself out as the hub, for certain situations where there's urgency or you're in such a substantial minority that you shouldn't be subject to these majority areas because we can't provide safety and support in those discussions, then yes, that makes tons of sense. Primarily though, removing yourself, and this is about power, it's about giving up power, it's about letting go of some power, it's why I teach about power. If government kind of pulls back and uses its power to instead provide the convening space and the capacity building and the knowledge so that people can start talking to each other, you see a very different situation. So what happens is roughly this. For the first 3 meetings, the advisory committee, working group, task force, everyone comes in that room, or 95% of people come in, and they treats each other like government. They're asserting their needs and wants. And then you see this thing happen where they're like, wow, these meetings are going to really be awful if I just keep coming and saying my needs, and they keep coming and saying, we're not going to get anywhere, right? So by about meeting 3, they start listening, and they're like, Aftab's got some fantastic points. Aftab's needs actually may be more substantial than mine, right, in this situation. And Shachi's got some great stuff. Rachel, Ginger, maybe I want to, so that goes on for 2 or 3 meetings. By, the 7th meeting, you're watching problem solving happen, and you create durable policy. People who thought they would never agree with each other, who didn't come to a process or an issue to agree, but simply to assert needs and wants, suddenly start becoming champions for each other's issues. And where in certain environments, these representative citizens' assemblies can really work, right? But even at a micro scale, a working group or a task force, I think that's where the magic happens in local government. And it's about providing the support to make it magic and not just 20 people sitting around the table asserting their needs and wants week after week that's the war of attrition, and that can happen too in local government.
Thank you very much. I don't want to put you on the spot, Rachel, because I know you might need a sip of water, but I saw you nodding there. I imagine that listening and ceding time to other opinions and other points of view is a big part of your work in your organization. And do you need some more water? Are you okay?
No, I have 2 kids under 3, as I noted, and I'm constantly sick, but this is actually the tail end of it. It's just a cough. So I apologize. Yeah, of course. We do a ton of work in trying to engage different backgrounds. Maybe come back.
Yes, I'm sorry. Okay. I've had kids under 3 as well. I can totally relate. We have about 5 minutes.
At least I'm not on TV. That's tomorrow. Oh, God.
5 minutes left here. I'm going to ask Shachi a question and then a kind of a group question as well about how we get people feeling engaged when, yes, polarization is exhausting, as you touched on earlier. But can it actually be good for democracy? Do you see? How does that happen?
You can say no.
I'm going to say no, but what I'm also going to say is, again, it's the should versus the is. So, no, polarization is not good for democracy. Yes, a spectrum exists in democratic discourse, and yes, people are going to find themselves, some people are going to find themselves at opposite ends of that discourse, and that is what is. Where we are starting to lose the plot, where we have already lost the plot, is in the dissolution of big tent politics. So polarization within a big tent political system or movement or party, well, sure, you're going to have your super progressives within the big tent, you're going to have your grassroots firebrands within the big tent, but they're all in the same tent, and they're all pissing in, not pissing out, and not pissing at each other. We are losing that. Brian Mulroney was one of the country's most unpopular prime ministers in living history and memory. He was also one of, and now Jean Chrétien is there, and he's getting old too, and we all die, but he will die before many of us die. These two were among the last, call them vanguards or presiders of a sense of big tent federal politics, where you could not tell a blue liberal from a red Tory, where conservative movements or liberal movements or even democratic movements had within them, you talk about the old conversations, but yet it is the fact that they're still with us. New Democrats who are pro-resource development and also having the conversation about that movement to renewable resource development and et cetera. So you said it was a quick question. It is a fact. What we're losing, again, is that sense of, and what is a big tent? Ultimately, it's people there united under, Andrea, you talked about common purpose. It's also common promise. When we asked Canadians what it meant to be Canadian in 2016, wasn't the healthcare, and it wasn't the hockey, and it wasn't the damn donuts. It was actually the idea of economic upward mobility. So I guess we're all trying to make money, whether we're south of the border or north of the border. But the idea is we can all be here, and if you work hard, you can live a decent life. Why are we starting to see a fraying in Canada that has lagged a little bit in the United States? Well, part of it is media cultural. We import a lot of ideas and a lot of people and a lot of sound bites from south of the border. but also it's because that common promise that spurs that common purpose is starting to come apart as we're dealing with affordability problems and equity problems and just problems within our families and our own homes and our own tents. And so, can it be a force for good? No, but we can be a force for good if we recognize that it's there and figure out how to deal with it.
Aha. Okay. So force for good. I have very little time left, as we do need to get to audience questions. But how can we be that force for good? How can we encourage people to engage and collaborate and move past that exhaustion and frustration? I'll just throw it open to the panel.
I'll just come back from to life here. We do it through the building of community. We understand that politics is alienating for most people. And so our goal is, number one, to create community amongst women. Number two, to then educate them about politics. And we found that by building community, so one of the things on Friday, we're launching our second cohort of our book club. I sold out my book club in 6 minutes, I think, last time. And that was because there was a community aspect. So I now have women across Canada reading about Terry Fallis's book, Best Laid Plans, Jody Wilson-Raybould's book. These are women that have never had a political touch point, but they want to come together for community with other women to discuss. And so we found that the more we can provide an opportunity for people to come together, and that being the ultimate goal is to share, to communicate, to learn. We found great success with trying to lessen the divisiveness of politics.
That's really palpable. Yeah, go ahead, Gafta.
Just quickly from a kind of a dialogue practitioner perspective, I think partly the answer to this is we need people who will convene. And for that, it actually is helpful to be internally polarized. Maybe that is the partial answer to when is it helpful. I think the fact that I kind of feel both ways about the big issues, like that is kind of helpful as the person trying to hold that space together. And I would say, Andrea's totally right. It's like in the spaces where people are talking to each other as opposed to talking to somebody who they think has power, can make, like, it just makes a huge lot of difference. And I might just very briefly share this example from the student space, university student spaces. I once facilitated this meeting between, it was like the social justice activists and the free speech club. And they wanted to come and talk together, and we spent like an hour just talking about how are you going to talk with each other? Like, what are the bases? What is that agreement like? And one of the agreements that this group of students came up with is we are not going to use provocative words that we know are, like we're not going to say snowflake or whatever. Like there are certain words that we know is going to upset the other party. We're not going to purposefully say them. Now, we might say them accidentally, and we might say things that we don't know is going to offend them, and there's lots of those, but at least we won't say the ones that we know for sure is going to upset the other person. And that was an amazing rule, that was enough to be able to get folks to talk with each other. So that kind of like, I think one of the principles of dialogue is trying to be thought-provoking instead of provocative, like making that distinction.
Oh, I love that
I
distinction.
Think makes a big difference.
Yeah, a baseline, again, fundamental rules of order. Did anyone want to jump in? Yeah, go ahead, Ginger.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the role of assimilation in this conversation, because I often feel like polarization is emerging because we have a group of folks that want to prioritize their rights and their needs over others. And there's no middle ground in understanding what kind of system would it take in order for all of us to have our needs validated and reflected in the systems. On top of that, we're pushing against a system that isn't necessarily working for any of us anymore. And a lot of it is right now people pushing back against the changes that they see coming forward, changes that are coming forward because we are a society that is finally validating the voices, the identities, the genders, the human rights, the cultural rights of folks who have not necessarily been reflected. And then we have a lot of other folks on the other hand who, remember a time when things were much more simpler, and they want to go back to that And that was a very assimilationist time in all of our lives, and we're breaking free from that. How can we express to folks that yearn for the old time to understand that we have always been here regardless? And isn't it possible to create a system and processes where we can all have what we need? Why do we have to steal, other people? Why do we have to steal land, right, in order to, have our rights recognized? Why do we have to push people out? Why do we have to close doors on folks? Why does it have to be, so violent, right? And I think, coming to AFTAB's point, there is a role for dialogue in this. And to Andrea's point, our governments are really responsible for creating those spaces that bring folks together to demonstrate there is a power bringing people together.
Thank you very much. Such illuminating responses to these questions. And it's now my pleasure to be able to ask your questions to our panel. And here's one from Jack. Thank you very much. Again, you can input your questions into Slido. And if you need help, just raise your hand and a staff member will come to you. Jack wants to know, do you have any thoughts on our mayor's polarizing decision to abolish the Parks Board without any opportunity for public input or vote? It's not being addressed to anyone, but whoever would like to. Andrea, yes, go right ahead.
You can pull up my
CBC
CBC interview on this is when it happened and hear roughly the same answer. Yes, I do have thoughts on it. I guess in the spirit of the evening and the discussion, I don't know that it helps to characterize it as polarizing.
Thank
Like,
you.
I think
I was
that's
going to say the same thing.
Yeah, it's a choice we make around that, right? There's I'm not a Ken Sim voter. I don't think that's going to come as a surprise to anyone who knows my political background. So I'm certainly not here to speak on behalf of his party or his ideology. I do think I will say as someone who was elected and hearing people publicly explain my motivations for things, they were not often right. So, we can look from the outside and not necessarily know what's going on inside. Having said that, I am a very strong proponent of public. At a fundamental level, we must have faith in our democratic institutions. If we don't have that, it's impossible for us to have that space for dialogue and ability to move forward. And I think that when one government gets rid of another, that doesn't feel good, right? It feels like our democratic institutions are out of our control. When the city, some of you may be old enough as I am to remember when the government of Ontario changed the city of Toronto, amalgamated it, like that felt really bad, right? Because it was out of our control. And so I think it is smart to take those kinds of decisions to referendum, because I think that's where you develop the mandate that you need to be able to maintain the confidence in government.
Thank you very much. I want to go to Shachi because you did respond to the use of the term polarization. But to Jack, the questioner, if we're talking about equipping people with language to be able to bridge across the divide, how would you approach that? How do we criticize public policy decisions without resorting to perhaps language that is provocative rather than thought-provoking?
It's challenging because part of it is we're no longer, we are separated from our grade 10 civics classes. We are separated from the language, and one of you used the word the literacy to pick our way through these conversations. It is easier to reach for a word that we're hearing mirrored and reflected back to us a lot more than it is to reach for words and thoughts and expressions that speak to the issue at hand. It sounds to me, based on your question, Jack, that the issue at hand is that you don't like the fact that you don't like the decision, and frankly, a lot of people don't. So you might
and lack of public input. I think.
Yeah, and lack of public input. So, there are people who really like the decision. They may use the words bold or bravado or going forward, swagger, whatever. Yes, swagger.
I've heard it once or twice.
There are those who might say boneheaded, short-sighted, bulldozing. Maybe we all need to get ourselves back onto thesaurus.com. I don't know, but what I do think is it's really important for all of us. As we are naturally reactive people, we react to things, to almost sometimes take those 2 or 3 steps back and say, okay, as I think about how I am going to react, what am I going to react to? What is it that's actually bothering me before I name it and I give it a word and I put that out there into the universe, being specific about the nature of the dispute or the argument or the complaint.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that question. Another question here now. So many people are exhausted, and it can be easier to avoid a conflict rather than engage in it. So any suggestions on how to engage and not feel totally burnt out?
Yeah, well, I'm one of those people, actually. I haven't been on Twitter/X since the change happened. And I, have taken myself off of LinkedIn. I'm just avoiding a lot of social media platforms out there because I feel myself being consistently exhausted by the news and the conversations that I see out there in my community and in the world. And I don't think that should be seen as a bad thing. I think that we all deserve to rest, to heal, and to give ourselves the space so that we can contemplate our sense of who we are, so that we can reconnect with our values, we can reconnect with our communities. And there are a lot of things that I'm doing in the interim that don't involve me scrolling through social media that make me feel like I'm still very much engaged in the issues and on top of what is happening in the world. And I don't feel bad about it, right? And so I just want to, put it out there that we don't have to feel bad for disconnecting for a certain amount of time, because if you're a passionate person, if you're community-oriented, you have strong values, you're probably not going to disconnect for a long time. You're going to do what feels right for you, and I just want to tell you to honor that. If it's needed, take it, because we'll see you again. I'm sure of that.
I can add, yes, and I think for me it's a kind of I basically pick the relationships that really matter to me, and decide that in those ones I'm gonna kind of fight early, fight often, that I'm gonna avoid the polarization or the kind of escalation of conflict by addressing it early. I think that can happen in relation, and it's important to happen in relationship, because the kind of unintuitive thing about conflict is that as we don't address it when it's small, it just gets bigger and bigger. Every time that you cycle through it, it just gets more difficult to address. So I think it's important to have identified relationships and spaces where I think you can actually have conflict. And I mean, everything that I know about methods of using with conflict, essentially the prescription is give it a form. If we just go into it, we're just gonna destroy each other. But if you think of the method of conflict resolution that's indigenous to this land, it's the circle. It's when it's your turn, you speak. Then you don't speak until it's your turn again. That form brings just enough stability and safety to a conversation that we can actually have it. So there's some kind of formulas, if you will, forms that make it a little bit easier.
Rachel? So as a news creator, which is a term that I'm starting to use in my line of work, I think, we talked a little bit about social media and the impact that it's had on creating division. But I also will say, I think we're coming to a point where people are exhausted of the amount of information that we're getting every day. So one thing that I try and do to ease that exhaustion is to become hopefully a trusted source for many people, but also a condensed source. Because, I saw it during the pandemic. In my line of work, I started putting on Instagram slides of Bonnie Henry's pressers every day. And I would go for my walk 6 feet away from everybody, and I would see friends, and they'd say, hey, I had no idea what was going on in the province except for what you posted on Instagram. And all I would do was take her hour-long press conference and consolidate it into one slide. And I started to think, if we made this information more accessible to people, would that kind of negate the exhaustion that we've seen over the last 10, 20 years when it comes to politics and news? And so I think, I want to give a shout out to some of the new media, like podcasters, like social media, people that are news creators that are trying to have a different conversation and trying to make it more accessible for people to ease some of that exhaustion.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Andrea.
I decided to run for public office. It seemed like less exhausting than sitting at home not making change happen, right? So I know it's not for everyone. So I'm not like, I would love you all to be involved politically in a party, in discussions, in whatever. But it's actually like, don't get me wrong, physically exhausting in ways I've had a child, and this is actually feeling more exhausting. Mine's 27 now, so I mean, maybe I've just forgotten it all. But knocking on doors for like 4 to 10 hours a day is very exhausting. But what is very energizing, this is the amazing thing about elections. You can go in North American culture onto private property, which is kind of amazing. And because you're there to talk about government policies, politics, it's okay. And you're there to like listen to what people say, and you get into these incredible conversations. It's incredible. And I mean, it's both energizing and just the saddest thing when people are like, wow, nobody has ever knocked on my door to talk to me about this before. Like a healthy democracy, we would be doing this, right? When you make eye contact with people, it's very different than the discussions you're having on Twitter. And it feels like our communities would be better if we were doing this more.
Imagine what would happen to trolling. Yeah. Thank you very much. In fact, we had a question about that here as well, and we're going to get to that in a moment. But first, this question from Tara Robertson, who writes, how can those of us who are fighting for inclusion strategically leverage the 63% of that silent majority to push for equity for people on the margins? Great question. Thank you very much, Tara. The 63%.
It's fascinating. So it's very much about perceptions of marginalizations and perceptions of equity, and like what are even do we even have common definitions around what those words mean? And we may be in rooms where 100% of people agree with what the definitions and of what those words are and who is represented by them and who is not represented by them. And then you can go into another room, and I travel the country a lot, and the words marginalization and equity and being left behind mean very, very different things in Edam, Saskatchewan, and Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta, than they do in downtown Vancouver. So I think, first of all, it's really around being able, again, to find the language and the framing to have conversations with people that you don't think you would normally have conversations with, and also checking your own assumptions, which I have to check my assumptions all the time, and data's really helpful for checking your assumptions. Like, well, you were wrong about that, girl. It's about checking your own assumptions around who you think needs help. In many cases, some things are fact and they are objective, and those who need help are those who need help, and there's no argument around it. But there are also profoundly differing points of view around what those things mean, who those people are. And so I think the question actually included the word fight. And so to me, that's an interesting choice of active verb around, well, who are we fighting for, and who do we risk losing in that fight? So all of those things. So the first thing I would say is set your baselines around common phrasing, common definition, bringing it back to that commonality. Get there. And then once you've framed that, and once you've made the case for why this is important and how this is important, people will listen. I think if anything we've established tonight, I hope, is that we are a thoughtful group of women who are listening. And we may not always agree, but we listen. And I'm always reminding myself to do that. So anyway, I don't know that that's a very helpful answer, but it is my answer.
It is helpful and interesting because you're saying, yes, come to an agreement and use language that is understandable to that 63%, because the question was very much about how do we get to that 63% in order to to lobby and advocate for change, in order to provide equity to those groups on the margins. Did you want to touch on that after?
I can. I think Tara and I probably have the same definition of equity-seeking groups. So I will say, I think part of it is it's almost like remembering or recognizing that most people are reasonable, like are in the middle. I think very quickly, and especially on that kind of zealot activist side of things, we very quickly jump into either you're with me or against me. And so just even remembering that there's this huge group of people. I'm just remembering when I was at the City of Vancouver when ABC was elected, and there was a part of me that was like, oh, geez, like this is not good. And as I got to know the folks on council, I mean, they care, and there's a lot of shared ground. Some of the decisions I totally don't agree with, but there's a kind of, if I just assumed that door was closed, I wouldn't even be knocking on it. And so I think we need to just allow for the possibility that we can be more on the same page that we think, and that makes a difference, I think. And it's strategic. Sorry, I just want to say it's more strategic to make friends than to be like absolutely right and everybody saying things exactly the way that you're saying. Like we make way more progress making alliances and
going
friends.
to people's front doors.
Yes.
Andrea.
And back doors and Porios and many places. It was making me think about Montana Burgess's work with Neighbors United. It's called Deep Canvassing. So it comes out of, in California, when they had the first referendum on marriage equality, they did sort of traditional political campaign behind it, and they had all this polling that said they were going to win, no problem. And so what happened was people opposed to marriage equality for queer people, or same-sex marriage, I guess is what I would say, because I think same-sex would be how they would have defined that proposition. So anyway, this Prop 8, Prop 7, now I'm forgetting the number. Anyway, California, referendum, same-sex marriage. Polling says they're going to win in a landslide. They did not win in a landslide because their opposition to this went around and knocked on doors, and it turns out people generally supported same-sex marriage until they were talked to. They were the 63%. And it turned out when they were talked to by someone who said, two people of the same sex getting marriage threatens my view of family, that was enough to swing a 63%er. And so out of that was born this technique called deep canvassing. And so the prop went back and has subsequently been won, but it was won because people went door to door and did what deep canvassing, what's different. Normally at the door, I am in a deep canvassing zone right now myself, but in the middle of an election, you tend to knock on doors and you're just like, are you with me or are you against me? And that's all I need to know and I'm leaving now. But deep canvassing, they really listened and heard what the real issues were for people and developed a campaign and a proposition actually, geared the proposition towards where they could find agreement. And it won in a landslide, so that's why they have same-sex marriage in California. But all to say, if you want more information about it, Neighbors United is the group here in Canada that does it. They're doing some work in Coquitlam. They'd love more volunteers if you'd like to volunteer with them. They do a lot of work. They're doing work in Alberta and a lot of rural areas, so here you'd need to be in Coquitlam to work with them.
Okay, thank you very much for that. This is a question I think I love this question because this came to my mind as you were speaking, Shachi, earlier about the tone that politicians set. And so this question is, what are respectful ways to communicate or demand better from leaders? Because I see people who express disagreement to leaders online, but they also sound like trolls. So thank you very much for that question. How do we engage, demand better, without ourselves lowering to the lowest common denominator?
I mean, I think I go back to what one of us said earlier, which is fundamentally, I choose to be an optimist around this. I think fundamentally we are generally caring, decent people who do not wish ill upon others in our communities, and that's really what it comes down to. So I see the 3-minute sign going up, so you're gonna be so proud of me, Amy. I would just say, like, just remind yourself of your golden rules and the manners that you were taught, and don't be a jerk. Like, just don't be a jerk.
Don't be a jerk. If you come away with anything this evening, yes, Rachel.
Get involved. Go out there. There's community groups that will help you, provide you with platforms to elected officials. Get involved in political parties. Knock on doors for people you support. And that's a great way to have a platform in order to have a respectful conversation with electeds.
Does anybody else want to? How do we demand better from political leaders?
Well, so Aftab, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but Aftab is a practitioner of a form of deep democracy that I'm sure you can't explain in 2.5 minutes, but maybe at least could point people in a direction of how to learn more about it. Because I do think that is part of the answer, is democracy literacy.
Yeah, democracy literacy and this idea of like finding the truth in the voices of minority, whichever side of the spectrum they tend to be on. I mean, it is a kind of not getting carried away with the voices of the margin, but also acknowledging their truth and bringing them in. So I'm not sure exactly if it speaks to this question, but deep democracy, if you want to look up another sort of methodology or worldview on how to go about this.
Another resource. I have 30 seconds. Shachi, this question. How do I make more friends who I disagree with? Because this was a big part of your speech.
I was just going to end with how do I make more friends? And it's like, well, we live in Metro Vancouver. It's really hard.
I could use help with that too. But
look, I think it's about finding things. How do you deal with the people in your lives who you disagree with? But what is that like zone of neutrality that you can start to nudge and expand? What are those shared interests and areas of shared things? It might be sports, it might be arts, it might be culture, it might be anything. Engage yourself and those people in the places where you can see each other as humans and as decent folk. And that's what will inevitably open up the space, just a couple of millimeters at a time, a couple of centimeters at a time, to hopefully create a space of decent dialogue.
reach across that kitchen table. I want to thank you all for being at this kitchen table this evening. What a scintillating, illuminating conversation. I really, really appreciate your time and your insights this evening. This is something, I think we all learned something. Don't be a jerk. But I really learned something today, some resources and ways to make space for other perspectives and to reach out, to listen. Perhaps your own opinion isn't the most important in that moment, but to listen to others. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Our panel members. Adria Reimer, Rachel Siegel, Ginger Gosnell-Myers, Aftab Irfan, and of course, Shachi Crow. My thanks as well to Dennis and Fiona. And I'd like to invite up to the stage now, Erin Seeley.
Thank you so much again to our panelists, to Aftab, to Ginger, Andrea, Rachel, our speakers, Shachi, amazing keynote, to Michelle for your incredible facilitation. We're so lucky to have you. To Fiona and to Dennis, we got some shared language in Hunkaminam, the language of poetry, to ground us. I think this was the opposite of exhausting, even though it's the end of the day. It was energizing. I think that's a call to action I was hearing at the end, of individuals being able to engage in either individually or in community to build those skills to speak across the divide. And maybe City Shift 2.0 is that matchmaking tool between folks who don't have the same views and want to center marginalized voices, want to create space for different perspectives, want to listen without judgment, and want to be able to express ourselves with passion. And isn't that grounding us in shared humanity? So thank you again for such an energizing and thought-provoking evening. A big round of applause to the panel. And I also want to thank our amazing ASL interpreters. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I hope this conversation's inspired you to take action. If you need more motivation, Women Transforming Cities made the pocket-sized guide to engaging with local governments that will give you more ideas and help you engage with local decision makers. You can pick one up at one of the tables outside. We have been live streaming this event and really want to appreciate all the folks who made that happen. I know we had some overflow crowds that are waiting outside, and please join them in a few minutes for our reception. To our local government leaders, thank you for being here tonight. We need you to continue working towards equitable and just communities. Please also pick up our Equity Kickstart Guide. It's a purple guide for more inspiration. This event marks the official wrap-up for the City Shift project that's been generously funded by Women and Gender Equality Canada. We've learned so much over the past 2.5 years. It has been a privilege to advocate for equitable cities, and we are encouraged by the progress and action we have seen. As much as it's closing, we do have a proposal that we're hoping will be funded for future work because this journey needs to continue, and the momentum that's being built with these kinds of conversations needs to have more room in our community. We know there's so much work to do. I want to thank our incredible YWCA team. It is Women's Day every day at our organization. We are so lucky. Amy, Yushka, Shauna, Heike, Marina, Safia, Fulvia. We have an amazing team, yes, who worked so hard to put this event on. I know many of you are excited to continue this conversation over charcuterie. Why not? Maybe that's the way, right? Charcuterie. Please join us for our post-event reception in the exhibition hall where we have light bites and non-alcoholic beverages, interactive displays, resources, information, and projects working to advance equity in our communities. When you leave the theater tonight, we'd love for you to share a word about how you're feeling so we can capture the collective impact of this conversation. And as you exit the theater, you'll see a large white wall that has a table with sticky notes and markers. Thank you again to our panelists, and thank you everyone for joining this evening.